to the channel. And as you can see, we're finally back in the cabin to continue on with the Friday the 13th series, picking up with Friday the 13th Part 2. But before we get started, if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button, like and share. That does go a long way in helping this channel grow and help me get to 100 subscribers by the end of summer. Now with that out the way, let's continue on with the show. Now, Friday the 13th is often hailed as not only as one of the better sequels in the Friday the 13th series, but it's often regarded as one of the better slasher sequels of all time.
Is it?
So 5 short months after the original Friday the 13th hit theaters, after the huge financial success, Paramount Pictures went on and proceeded with a sequel. And 1 year later, it hit theaters. So the question is, was it any good? That's what we're here to find out. So what they came up with 2 months later after the original Friday the 13th, Alice is in hiding. She's traumatized by what happened. It starts off with a dream sequence. She wakes up from it, and all of a sudden she's killed off in the first 5 minutes. And then 5 years later, somebody decides they want to reopen the camp, not in Crystal Lake, but next door to Packenat Lounge. And it's all good until blood is shed and people start dying. But before we get into the technicalities of a movie, I do want to address one thing that I often see criticized by fellow YouTubers, and that's about the intro to Friday the 13th Part 2. A lot of people put that as a negative. They say it's too long, it's unnecessary. But the reason why I want to address it is because you have to put yourself back into 1981, where you have to keep in mind the VHS only hit American shelves in 1976, so that was 5 to 6 years prior to the original coming out. And a lot of people at the time did not see the original Friday the 13th because at the time there was really no home media that was still trying to pick up. It was a luxury item, and a lot of people did not have cable television because that was also considered a luxury item. A lot of people couldn't see themselves paying for TV. And on top of that, even the few videos that was coming out on VHS, Friday the 13th and things like that was not high priority for the film companies. So a lot of people went into this movie not seeing the first one, only going by word of mouth. So if you notice from the first one probably up to the third or fourth one, there was always a long recap because during this time frame, home media was not available. A lot of people went into movies just based off of word of mouth and didn't know what was going on. So that 5-minute dream sequence was very necessary. So people that haven't seen the first one get caught up to speed what was going on. And for that reason, it was very necessary and it shouldn't be a negative in the movie. Now with that off my chest, let's jump right into positives.
You finished?
And the first positive about this movie is it improves on everything I had a problem with from the first movie, starting with the characters. The characters in this movie are more believable, they're more entertaining, they have more charisma, they have more of a presence on screen. And speaking of the characters, that leads me into probably my biggest positive of this movie, and that's Amy Steele as Jenny. She's regarded as one of the better final girls of not only Friday the 13th, but slasher movies in general. She's smart, she's intuitive, she uses instincts, she makes good decisions when she's faced with danger, and she fights back. She's one of my favorite final girls, and she took this movie to another level. She was definitely a step up from Alice from the first movie. Another positive in this movie are the kills are still good. Despite the fact they was not able to retain the services of Tom Savini from the first one, the group that they got to come up with, they did a pretty good job. Listen, the sequel just a step below the first one, but they're still pretty good. And it did have that great kill, one of my favorites of all time, the wheelchair kill. You know which one I'm talking about.
Vicky?
special effects in this movie did not have a big drop off. And some people argue it's better, but not me. But it did have, like I said, one of my favorite kills.
Yes! That's awesome!
Which leads me into my next positive, the killer himself, Jason Voorhees. Now, little fun fact, the first time we see Jason Voorhees, the first and only time in the franchise, he's actually played by a woman. The legs walking across the street at the beginning of this movie was a producer on set. She put on the pants, so she was officially the first Jason. But to me, Jason Voorhees is a more intimidating killer. Even though I do like Pamela Voorhees, and like I said in my last review, I do think she's underrated. Having a bigger, hulking guy coming towards you, even though this is a smaller Jason, we'll talk about that later. It's still a little more intimidating to have a guy coming at you, especially with a burlap sack on his head. So that's one of the biggest improvements, and also they spawned one of the biggest horror icons of all time. Even though he's not to the form of Jason that we are accustomed to seeing today. So the killer is definitely a positive. Getting to my last positive, if you watched my last review, you know I had a problem with the previous movie because there were sections in the movies that were filler, didn't really lead to anything. For instance, the coffee scene where we sit there and watch them make coffee. But this movie ditched all that. This movie definitely have a better flow. It's easier to watch. It starts off with a bang. There's really no down periods even when Jason's not on the screen. And it helps that the characters are better. You're more invested in them throughout this movie. So the flow is definitely improving, and that's my final positive. Now moving on to my one and only mixed aspect. Like I touched on earlier, the Jason Voorhees in this movie is not the Jason that we know. He's not the hockey mask wearing badass that he will eventually become known as. And while I do like the look of Jason in this one, it does borrow very heavily from the antagonist from The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Now Steve Miner and Sean S. Cunningham claim that they have never seen that movie and that was not their inspiration.
Yeah, right.
But when you look at the two side by side, there are definitely a lot of similarities. This was a humanoid Jason. He's more vulnerable. There's scenes where he actually get beat up by Jenny. And on top of that, this is the smallest Jason in the whole franchise other than Child Jason. So he's not the Jason that we know, and that's no fault of their own. This was supposed to be another one-off movie, but because this too was financially successful, they continue on with the franchise.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
And Jason will not be fully visualized until the next movie. Now, even though I've been singing the praises of this movie is not perfect. There are negatives.
Boy, here we go.
So, jumping into the negatives, and I do have 3 negatives. The first negative is the story really makes no sense. According to the first movie, Jason Voorhees drowned. His mother could not take the pain of losing her child. They sent her on a murderous rampage. But now, all of a sudden, Jason is alive. He lived, he survived the drowning for some unexplained reason. And he watched his mother get beheaded. So now he's on a murderous rampage for everyone that come into his territory, even though this movie does not take place in Crystal Lake. It's Packing Atlanta.
What?
The story makes no sense whatsoever. It's one of the reasons why Tom Savini did not return and why Sean Cunningham did not return as well. As a matter of fact, the director duties were handed off to Steve Miner, and Frank Mancuso Jr. took over as associate producer, where he would be over the Friday 13th rate from here on out to the end of his time with Paramount Pictures. So like I said, the story makes no sense whatsoever. It's really surface level. We're supposed to forget about the first one and kind of just go along with it. And it's a major plot hole, which leads into my second negative. This is pretty much the same story, only reverse characters. Like I said before, the first Friday 13th was about the mother avenging the death of her son, and this Friday 13th is about the son avenging the murder of his mother. So pretty much this is the very first movie that a couple of characters switched around, a little more money thrown at it, and it pretty much ends the same. Which leads me into my last and final negative, the jump scare in this movie. If you watch my review of the first Friday 13th, you know that I think the jump scare in that movie is the one and only time that it actually worked. They tried to do it again in this one with Jason busting out the window, but it makes no sense. We do not know if that was a dream sequence or not. We never find out what happened to Paul. It's just really that, a jump scare that leads into nothing. At least the first one was Little Swamp Jason jumping out the lake, which kind of make you think if that really happened or not. Was it Ghost Jason? Was a figment of her imagination? Apparently, it really happened. But this one, it really makes no sense. Jason jumps through the window, he grabs Jenny, it goes in slow motion. All of a sudden she wakes up, she's looking for Paul. We never know what happened to Paul. The dog is there. It's just a big convoluted mess. So I do not like the jump scare, and going forward, every other Friday the 13th movie with this jump scare at the end is garbage. I do not like it. Now, with all that said, it's time for my ranking. Like I said before, most people consider this a classic, one of the best slashers of all time. While I do enjoy this movie and think it's a slightly bigger upgrade from the first one, which I gave the first one a purchase worthy, and it does have more rewatch value, I am very particular about what I give a classic rating to. And there's only 3 movies in this franchise that I think are classics, but this one is right below it, and I'm going to say this movie is purchase worthy. Now, don't get me wrong, it's close to being on that classic level. If you think this is a classic, I can completely understand. But for me, there are enough negatives in this movie to keep it from being classic. But what do you guys think? Is Friday the 13th Part 2 one of your favorites? Is it at the bottom of the list, the middle? I'm interested to know what's your favorite movie in Friday the 13th series. Which one are you waiting for me to get to? Because I will be reviewing all these movies, including, once I'm finished reviewing every movie, including Jason vs. Freddy in this, and the 2009 remake, I will be ranking the killers in the franchise. So remember, my opinion is just that. It's my opinion. Let me know yours down below, and keep your eyes open for my next video.